A nurse's punishment turns into a life-altering journey as she uncovers a dark secret buried deep within a homeless man's past. But when the truth surfaces, it's not just his fate that's at stake, it's hers as well. Welcome to our channel. If you love great stories filled with twists, emotion, and more, don't forget to subscribe for more. Today, Nurse Vanessa stood in front of Mr. Foley's desk, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always known the ward chief was strict, but today he looked angrier than she had ever seen him. His eyes were cold, his lids tight. "You're too soft, Nurse Vanessa," Mr. Foley said, his voice sharp. "These patients, they don't need your pity. They need discipline. And you need to toughen up." Vanessa bit her lip, her fingers twisting the edge of her uniform nervously. She had only wanted to help the old woman in room 302, who had been too weak to eat her meal. Vanessa had fed her, and for that, Mr. Foley was punishing her. What do you want me to do?" Vanessa asked, her voice trembling slightly. A slow, cruel smile spread across Mr. Foley's face. "There's a new patient in room 109, a homeless man. Filthy. He hasn't been cleaned in weeks. I want you to bathe him." Vanessa's heart sank. She had heard the whispers about the hobo. People said he was disgusting, covered in dirt and grime, and had a strange, unsettling silence. But what choice did she have? If she refused, Mr. Foley might fire her. Taking a deep breath, Vanessa nodded. "I'll do it," she said softly. As she walked down the hallway toward room 109, her mind raced. She had always tried to treat all her patients with kindness and respect, but something about this felt different. The man in room 109. He wasn't like the others. No one knew his name or why he was there. He had simply been found on the streets and brought in. When she finally reached the room, Vanessa paused at the door, her hand trembling on the handle. She could smell the stench before she even opened it, sour and musty, like old sweat and dirt. Steeling herself, she pushed the door open. The man sat in the corner of the room, his back against the wall. His clothes were ragged, his hair matted into thick clumps. His eyes, dark and hollow, stared at her from beneath his tangled hair. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Vanessa swallowed hard, forcing herself to step inside. Her heart pounded in her ears as she gathered the supplies. A basin of warm water, soap, a washcloth. She felt his gaze on her, heavy and unblinking, as she knelt beside him. "I'm here to help you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The man said nothing. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. Slowly, Vanessa dipped the washcloth into the water and wrung it out. She reached toward him, her hand trembling, and gently touched his arm. His skin was rough, scared. As she began to wash him, she noticed more scars, some fresh, some old. What had this man been through? Where had he come from? Her mind raced with questions, but she knew he wouldn't answer. He hadn't spoken a single word since he arrived. As the dirt and grime slowly washed away, Vanessa found herself feeling something she hadn't expected. Pity, yes, but also curiosity. Who was this man? And why did she feel like there was something more to his story than anyone knew? The next morning, Vanessa found herself hesitating outside room 109. Yesterday had been difficult. Bathing the hobo had been unlike anything she'd ever done before. His silence unnerved her, and yet, there was something about him she couldn't quite shake. His eyes had haunted her dreams. Dark, hollow, but with a spark of something buried deep inside. Finally, she took a deep breath and opened the door. The man was sitting in the same spot as before, curled in the corner of his bed, staring at the blank wall. His clothes had been replaced with a hospital gown, and though he was clean now, the bruises and scars that covered his body were more visible. The sight made Vanessa's chest tighten. What had this man gone through? "Good morning," she said softly, though she didn't expect a response. She set down the basin of water and soap on the small table beside the bed. She wasn't ordered to bathe him again today, but something told her he might need more care. If no one else would help him, she would. The man didn't move as she approached, but his eyes flicked toward her for a split second. It was so brief, Vanessa almost missed it, but it was enough to give her the courage to keep going. "I'm going to clean your wounds," she explained, as if he'd asked. He didn't protest, didn't flinch, didn't give any sign that he even cared. But Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, studying her every move. As she worked, she saw more of the man than anyone else in the hospital had. Underneath the layers of grime, she noticed intricate tattoos running up his arms and across his chest. One looked like an eagle, wings outstretched, another like a name written in cursive. "Who are you?" Vanessa whispered, more to herself than to him. The man didn't answer, but his eyes flicked to hers. This time, she was sure of it. Over the next few days, Vanessa came to room 109 regularly. She wasn't required to, but she felt a strange pull toward the silent man. She began to speak to him more, even though he never replied. She told him stories about her life, how she became a nurse, her childhood in a small town, her dreams of traveling the world someday. At first, the man didn't react. He remained still, staring at the walls or the ceiling, as if lost in some faraway place. But little by little, Vanessa began to notice small changes. One day, as she was cleaning his arm, she felt him tense slightly. Another time, she caught him watching her as she worked, his dark eyes following her every move. She began to wonder if there was more behind his silence. Was it fear? Pain? Shame? The questions swirled in her mind as she bathed him, cleaned his wounds, and continued her one-sided conversations. Other nurses began to notice her visits. They gossiped, teasing her for spending so much time with a man who was little more than a homeless ghost. "He'll never talk to you, Vanessa," one of them laughed. "You're wasting your time." But Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that the man was more than what he seemed. His scars, his tattoos, the way he sometimes looked at her with those intense eyes, they told a story she couldn't quite grasp. Then, on the third day, something happened that shook Vanessa to her core. She was sitting beside the man, telling him a story about her childhood dog, when she felt a gentle tug on her sleeve. It was so soft, so small, that for a moment she thought she'd imagined it. But when she looked down, she saw it, the man's hand, trembling slightly, gripping the edge of her uniform. Her breath caught in her throat. He was looking at her, his eyes wide and full of something she hadn't seen before. Fear, hope, maybe even trust. Vanessa's heart raced. She didn't know what to say, so she stayed silent, waiting. Finally, after what felt like forever, the man opened his mouth. His voice was raspy, like it hadn't been used in years. "Help," he whispered, the word barely audible. It was the first word he had spoken since he arrived. Vanessa stared at him, stunned. What had just happened? What did he need help with? She didn't know, but in that moment, one thing was clear. This man was not who she thought he was. There was something hidden beneath the surface, something dangerous or broken, or perhaps both. She had to find out the truth. The next morning, Vanessa hurried to the hospital, her mind racing after what had happened the day before. That single word, the first word the hobo had spoken, echoed in her head. Help. It was a plea, but for what? Help from what? Or whom? There were so many questions and no answers. As she neared room 109, a chill crept down her spine. Something felt wrong. The hallway, usually filled with the sounds of nurses bustling and patients talking, seemed unusually quiet. Her heart pounded faster as she reached the door and pushed it open. The bed was empty. Vanessa's breath hitched. The blankets were thrown back, the pillow crumpled, but there was no sign of the man she had spent the last 3 days caring for. Panic surged through her. Where could he have gone? Had he escaped? Was he wandering the streets again? The hospital had strict rules. No patient could just disappear like that. Without thinking, Vanessa rushed down the hall, searching for any nurse or staff member who might know what had happened. She spotted one of the other nurses, Amanda, by the nurses' station. "Amanda," Vanessa called out, breathless. "The man in room 109. He's gone." "Did anyone see where he went?" Amanda looked up, her expression unreadable. "Oh, that hobo," she said dismissively. "They transferred him out early this morning. Some special team came in, said they were taking him to a different facility." Vanessa blinked, confused. What? What special team? Why would they? Before Amanda could answer, a loud commotion erupted at the entrance to the ward. Vanessa turned to see a group of police officers storming in, their faces grim and determined. Her heart sank. They made a beeline straight for her. "Nurse Vanessa," one of them asked, his voice deep and commanding. "We need to speak with you immediately. It's about the man in room 109. Vanessa felt the blood drain from her face. "What's going on?" she stammered. "What's happened?" The officer's eyes were hard. "The man you've been caring for isn't who you think he is. He's extremely dangerous. We need to find him. Now." Dangerous. The word echoed in Vanessa's mind like a bell ringing in the silence. This man, the quiet, broken hobo who barely spoke, who had asked her for help, was dangerous. How could that be? "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "Who is he?" The officer stepped closer, lowering his voice, as if what he was about to say was too shocking to say aloud. "His real name is Dr. Michael Reed. He was once a famous surgeon, but he disappeared years ago after being accused of a terrible crime." Vanessa's stomach churned. The surgeon. Her mind reeled. That couldn't be right. This man was a homeless drifter, barely able to speak, let alone perform surgery. What kind of crime? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The officer hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. He was accused of murdering a patient. They said he botched a surgery and then tried to cover it up. When they started investigating, he vanished. He's been on the run ever since. The room seemed to spin around Vanessa. The hobo, the man she had bathed, spoken to, trusted, was a wanted criminal. A murderer. It didn't make sense. She thought of the scars on his body, the haunted look in his eyes. How could someone so broken, so lost, be the same person the police were describing? "I don't believe it," Vanessa said, shaking her head. "He couldn't have done something like that. He needs help." The officer frowned. "People can be good at hiding who they really are. Nurse, we've been searching for him for years. If you know where he is, you need to tell us now. He's dangerous." Vanessa's mind raced. Yesterday, the man had asked her for help. She had felt the desperation in his voice, the way he had gripped her sleeve like she was his last hope. What if he really was innocent? What if there was more to the story than the police knew? But what if he wasn't? Before Vanessa could say anything, one of the other officers received a call on his radio. His eyes widened. "We've got him," he said to the group. "He's hiding in the hospital basement." Vanessa's heart leaped. The basement? Why would he go there? Her instincts kicked in, and before she could think, she was running down the hall, toward the stairs that led to the hospital's lower levels. She had to find him. She had to know the truth, before the police did. As she descended into the dark, musty basement, Vanessa's thoughts swirled. If he was innocent, why had he run? But if he was guilty, could she forgive herself for helping him escape? The truth was waiting for her, somewhere in the shadows of the basement, and Vanessa wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. The basement was cold and dimly lit, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the concrete walls. Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest as she descended the stairs, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had no idea what she was going to find, but she knew one thing. She had to get to him before the police did. The man she had come to know, the one she had bathed and cared for, didn't fit the picture the police had painted. Could he really be Dr. Michael Reed, the surgeon accused of such a horrible crime? And if he was, could he also be the same broken, desperate soul who had gripped her hand and whispered for help? Vanessa's mind raced with questions as she reached the bottom of the stairs. The basement stretched out before her, a maze of storage rooms and empty corridors. It was quiet, too quiet, except for the distant hum of machinery. She moved cautiously, listening for any sign of him. Her footsteps echoed softly as she made her way down the narrow hall. Every shadow seemed to hold secrets, every dark corner filled with uncertainty. And then she saw him. He was huddled in a corner, his back against the wall, his arms wrapped around his knees. His hospital gown hung loosely on his thin frame, and his dark, matted hair covered his face. He didn't look like a man capable of hurting anyone, let alone committing murder. But then again, how much did she really know about him? "Michael?" she called softly, her voice trembling. At the sound of his name, the man's head jerked up. His eyes were wide with fear, and his body tensed as if he was ready to bolt. He looked like a cornered animal, trapped and terrified. Vanessa approached slowly, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk." For a long moment, he didn't move. His eyes darted around the room, as if he were looking for an escape route. But there was nowhere to go. Finally, he relaxed just a little, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "Why did you run?" Vanessa asked, keeping her voice calm and steady. "If you didn't do anything wrong, why are you hiding?" His eyes flicked to hers, and for the first time, Vanessa saw something new in them: shame. His voice, when it came, was low and hoarse. I didn't run because I was guilty. I ran because no one would believe me." Vanessa knelt beside him, her heart aching at the sight of him so broken, so vulnerable. "Tell me the truth," she said softly. "What really happened?" He took a deep breath, his eyes distant, as if he were reliving a nightmare. "I was a surgeon, a good one. But there was an accident. A patient came in, a young woman. She was badly injured, and I did everything I could to save her. But something went wrong in the operating room." His voice cracked, and Vanessa could see the weight of guilt in his eyes. "She died on the table," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "And they said it was my fault. They said I made a mistake, but I didn't. I swear, I didn't. I was set up." Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. "Set up? By who?" "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "But after the investigation started, everything fell apart. I lost my job, my reputation. People started saying I killed her on purpose. They made me out to be some kind of monster. And I couldn't fight it. No one would listen." "So you ran," Vanessa whispered, piecing it together. "You disappeared." He nodded. "I had nothing left. No one believed me. So I left. I thought maybe if I disappeared, the truth would come out on its own. But it never did." Vanessa felt her heart breaking for him. She had seen the scars, the bruises, the years of suffering etched into his skin. But could he be telling the truth? Could a man so broken really be innocent? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the basement. Vanessa's heart raced. The police were coming. She had to make a decision. Right now. She turned to Michael. "If what you're saying is true, then we need to prove it. But you can't keep running. You need to face this." His eyes widened in fear. "They'll never believe me," he whispered. "They'll throw me in prison, and that'll be the end of it." Vanessa's mind spun. There had to be a way. She had to help him. "I'll testify for you," she said firmly. "I'll tell them what you told me, about how you've been living, about your scars, your suffering. But we have to go to them now, before it's too late." Michael looked at her, his eyes full of doubt, but also hope. For the first time in years, maybe he saw a way out, a chance for redemption. Just then, the police burst into the room, their guns drawn. "Step away from him, nurse," one of the officers shouted. Vanessa stood up slowly, her heart racing. She held out her hand. "Wait. He's not who you think he is. Please, listen to me. He's innocent. The officers hesitated, glancing at each other. Michael stayed still, his eyes wide with fear. "This man was framed," Vanessa said, her voice steady but urgent. "He's been living in hiding because no one would believe him. But I believe him." One of the officers stepped forward, lowering his gun slightly. "We'll take him in, but if what you're saying is true, we'll investigate. But we can't let him go free just yet." Vanessa nodded. It wasn't the ending she had hoped for, but it was something. As the officers led Michael away, he glanced back at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. And for the first time, Vanessa knew that no matter what happened next, she had done the right thing. The hospital returned to its usual rhythm after Michael was taken away. But for Vanessa, everything had changed. The familiar sounds of beeping machines and soft footsteps down the hall faded into the background as her thoughts churned, heavy with the events of the past few days. Could it really be over? She stood at the window in the staff break room, staring out at the parking lot below, her mind replaying the moment when the police had led Michael away. His eyes, so haunted, yet filled with gratitude, stayed with her, and she couldn't shake the weight of the decision she had made. Had she done the right thing? Would the police believe his story, or would they lock him away without a second thought? "Nurse Vanessa," a voice called from behind her, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Amanda, one of the other nurses. She stood at the doorway, her arms crossed, an eyebrow raised. "You okay?" Vanessa forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah," she said, her voice flat. "Just a lot to think about." Amanda stepped into the room, her expression curious. "A lot of people are talking, you know," she said, leaning against the counter. "About the hobo, or Dr. Reed, or whatever his name is. People are wondering why you got so close to him." Vanessa sighed. She had expected this. The rumors, the gossip. Nurses and doctors whispered in the halls, questioning why she had spent so much time with a man everyone had dismissed as nothing more than a vagrant. But Vanessa had seen something different. She had seen the humanity buried beneath the grime and the silence. "I don't know, Amanda," Vanessa said quietly. I believed him." Amanda frowned. "You believed him? After what the police said? I mean, the guy was accused of murder." "I know," Vanessa replied, her voice a bit stronger now. "But I also know that people can be wrong. They can judge others without knowing the full story." Amanda looked unconvinced, but didn't press further. She shrugged. "Well, I guess it doesn't matter now. He's gone, right? They'll deal with it." Gone. The word echoed in Vanessa's mind, leaving an empty ache in her chest. Michael had been taken, but she still felt responsible for him, as if there was more she needed to do. She couldn't just forget about him, not after everything they'd been through together. Not after the way he had reached out to her, trusting her with his deepest fears. As Amanda left the room, Vanessa sat down at the table, her thoughts swirling. She had agreed to testify on Michael's behalf, but that didn't mean he was safe. The legal system was complicated, and she knew that even if he was innocent, proving it would be an uphill battle. The accusations against him were serious. A murder charge wasn't something that just disappeared. But Vanessa wasn't one to give up easily. She had seen the truth in Michael's eyes, felt the raw desperation in his voice when he had finally spoken. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who had been broken by the world, abandoned by everyone who should have protected him. She decided right then that she would fight for him. Over the next few days, Vanessa threw herself into finding out more about Michael's past. Between her shifts at the hospital, she spent hours digging through old news reports and court records. She found articles about the surgery that had gone wrong, about the young woman who had died under Michael's care. The headlines were brutal, condemning him as a reckless surgeon who had tried to cover up his mistakes. But the more she read, the more inconsistencies she noticed. Witnesses had given conflicting statements, and the hospital where Michael had worked had quickly distanced itself from the case, offering no support or defense. It all seemed too convenient. Then she found something that made her heart race. In an old, forgotten report buried deep in the archives of a local news website, there was mention of another surgeon, a man named Dr. Andrew Mercer. He had been Michael's colleague at the time of the incident, and the article hinted at tensions between the two. Dr. Mercer had testified against Michael during the investigation, claiming that Michael had been negligent. But what if it wasn't negligence? What if it was something more? Vanessa's mind spun as she pieced the puzzle together. Could Dr. Mercer have set Michael up? Could he have been the one responsible for the young woman's death, using Michael as a scapegoat? The thought was terrifying, but it made sense. Dr. Mercer had taken over Michael's position at the hospital shortly after the investigation, rising in the ranks while Michael's life crumbled. This wasn't just about a botched surgery. This was about betrayal. The next morning, Vanessa called the police, her hands shaking as she explained what she had found. They agreed to investigate further, though she could hear the skepticism in their voices. She knew this wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. She had given them a reason to doubt the narrative that had been built around Michael all those years ago. As she hung up the phone, Vanessa felt a surge of determination. Michael's fate wasn't sealed yet, and she wasn't about to let him go without a fight. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was his only chance at redemption, and she wouldn't let him down. Weeks passed, and Vanessa's life became a blur of hospital shifts, late-night research, and endless phone calls. She barely slept, consumed by her mission to uncover the truth about Michael Reed. Her once simple, predictable life had turned into something far more complicated, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't rest until she knew Michael's fate. The police had agreed to reopen the investigation, but progress was slow. Every day, Vanessa waited for news, anxiously checking her phone between patients. The weight of it all pressed down on her. Her loyalty to Michael, her doubts, and the nagging fear that she might be fighting a losing battle. Then one evening, as Vanessa was finishing a shift at the hospital, she received a call. It was Officer Daniels, the lead detective on Michael's case. "Vanessa, I need you to come down to the station," he said, his voice steady but serious. "We found something." Her heart raced. Was this the breakthrough she'd been hoping for? She quickly changed out of her scrubs and rushed to the police station, her thoughts swirling with anticipation and fear. When she arrived, Officer Daniels led her into a small conference room. Inside, several files were spread out across the table. Vanessa's eyes were immediately drawn to a familiar name, Dr. Andrew Mercer. "We've been looking into your claims," Daniels began, motioning for her to sit. "At first, we were skeptical, but after digging through some old records, we found something interesting." He handed her a document, and Vanessa's eyes scanned the page. It was a financial report, showing a large sum of money that had been transferred to Dr. Mercer just days after the botched surgery. Her breath caught in her throat. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniels leaned forward, his expression grim. "It's a payoff, Vanessa. We believe Dr. Mercer was bribed to shift the blame onto Michael. We're not sure who's behind it yet, but it's clear that Michael was set up." Vanessa's mind reeled. She had suspected something like this, but seeing it in black and white made it all too real. "So Michael was innocent," she said, her voice filled with relief and anger. "He's been suffering all these years for something he didn't do." Daniels nodded. "It looks that way. We're bringing Mercer in for questioning, but it's going to take time to get all the pieces in place. In the meantime, we've secured Michael's release on bail." The words hit Vanessa like a wave. Michael was going to be free, at least for now. After everything he had been through, there was finally a glimmer of hope. She felt a mixture of emotions: joy, relief, and a burning desire for justice. Underscore 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 underscore. 2 days later, Vanessa stood outside the courthouse, waiting. It was a chilly morning, and the wind tugged at her coat as she watched the building's doors. Her mind buzzed with nerves and anticipation. Today was the day Michael would be released. When the doors finally swung open, Michael stepped out, flanked by two officers. He looked different, still thin and weary, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was no longer the silent, broken man she had found in the hospital. He was someone with hope again. As soon as he saw Vanessa, a faint smile crossed his face. She rushed over, her heart swelling with emotion. "You're free," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Michael looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thanks to you," he said softly. "I don't even know how to begin to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Vanessa replied, shaking her head. "You just need to fight now. We're going to clear your name." Michael's face grew serious, and he nodded. "I will," he said firmly. "I've been running for so long, I forgot what it felt like to stand up for myself. But I'm ready now." In the weeks that followed, the investigation into Dr. Mercer and the mysterious payoff deepened. The police uncovered more evidence, emails, phone records, and testimony from former hospital staff that pointed to a conspiracy to cover up the hospital's mistakes. It became clear that Michael had been the scapegoat for a much larger problem, and that Dr. Mercer had played a key role in orchestrating the cover-up. As the truth came to light, the charges against Michael were officially dropped. The media, which had once vilified him as a reckless surgeon, now portrayed him as a victim of a corrupt system. His story made headlines, and people across the city rallied behind him, calling for justice. But for Michael, the public support wasn't enough. He had lost years of his life, his career, and his reputation. Even though he was free, he still had a long road ahead. Vanessa remained by his side throughout it all. They had formed an unbreakable bond, one that had grown out of trust, compassion, and a shared fight for justice. Michael had found a friend and an advocate in Vanessa, and she had discovered her own strength and purpose in helping him. One quiet evening, as they sat together in a small cafe, Michael looked at Vanessa with a thoughtful expression. "You saved me," he said quietly, "not just from prison, but from giving up. I had lost hope, until you showed me that there was still something worth fighting for." Vanessa smiled, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You didn't need saving, Michael," she said gently. "You just needed someone to believe in you." And in that moment, both of them realized that they had given each other something far more valuable than freedom. They had given each other hope, and the strength to face whatever came next. The years that followed Michael's release were challenging but transformative. He had been cleared of the charges, but rebuilding his life and career was no simple task. With Vanessa's unwavering support, Michael found a new purpose, one that extended far beyond surgery or clearing his name. Together, they had a vision. They wanted to create a place where people who had fallen through the cracks of society could find healing, justice, and hope. Michael knew firsthand how devastating it could be to be cast aside, blamed for things beyond one's control. Vanessa, with her compassion and resilience, shared that vision. And so, they began working on something that would take them both on a remarkable new journey. A wellness facility focused on mental and physical health, and more importantly, a place built on equity, justice, and accountability. In the early days, it was just a dream, a conversation between the two of them over coffee or in between their work shifts. But they didn't let it stay that way for long. Vanessa spent her days at the hospital, while Michael began researching potential grants and programs that could help fund their vision. Slowly but surely, they started piecing things together. It wasn't easy. There were countless setbacks, endless meetings with bureaucrats, rejections from donors who couldn't see the importance of their mission, and times when they wondered if their dream was too big to ever become real. But with each hurdle, they grew stronger, more determined. Michael poured his energy into research, working day and night to develop a wellness program that blended cutting-edge medical treatment with compassionate care. It wasn't just about treating illness, but about treating people, seeing them as whole beings, deserving of respect and dignity. Vanessa, on the other hand, tackled the administrative side. She fought for grants, networked with healthcare professionals, and helped craft the foundation of the wellness center they would build. They were an unstoppable team, united by their shared goal. After a year of tireless work, their efforts paid off. They secured a grant from a prominent health organization that recognized the importance of holistic wellness and social justice in healthcare. That funding was the breakthrough they needed. With it, they officially launched the Equity Wellness Center. The facility blossomed. At first, it was a modest building with only a few rooms and a small staff, but the impact it made on the community was immediate. People from all walks of life came to the center: homeless individuals, victims of trauma, people suffering from mental health issues, and those who had been marginalized by the system. Vanessa and Michael ensured that every person who walked through the doors was treated with the same respect and care, no matter their background. The core principles of the Equity Wellness Center were clear: justice, accountability, transparency, and equity. These weren't just words on a plaque. They lived by them every day, ensuring that everyone who worked there upheld the same values. Patients were involved in their care plans. Transparency was practiced at every level, and the community was invited to hold them accountable. Over time, the center's reputation grew. They expanded their services, offering free clinics, mental health counseling, nutrition programs, and even legal aid for those who had been wronged by the system, much like Michael once had. The center became a beacon of hope for the community, a symbol of what could be achieved when justice and compassion were at the heart of healthcare. 5 years later, the Equity Wellness Center was thriving. It had grown into a large facility with branches in other parts of the city, each one dedicated to providing care and dignity to those in need. Michael had regained not only his career but his sense of purpose. And Vanessa, she had become more than just a nurse. She was a leader, an advocate, and the driving force behind the center's success. Through it all, their bond had deepened. What had started as a partnership rooted in justice had blossomed into something more. They had stood by each other in the toughest of times, and through their shared journey, they had become each other's greatest supporters. On a crisp autumn day, surrounded by friends, family, and the very people whose lives they had touched through their work, Michael and Vanessa were married in a simple, heartfelt ceremony at the Wellness Center, the place that had come to symbolize not only their shared dream but also their journey from despair to hope. As they exchanged vows, the weight of everything they had been through, the struggles, the triumphs, the battles for truth and justice, seemed to melt away. They had built something incredible, not just for themselves, but for the world around them. Their story wasn't just one of redemption. It was one of healing, growth, and an unshakable commitment to making the world a better place. In the years that followed, their work continued to flourish. They remained committed to upholding the principles that had brought them together: equity, justice, accountability, trust, empathy, and transparency. And now, as husband and wife, they looked forward to the future, knowing that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together. Because they had learned one simple truth: love, like justice, is worth fighting for. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling content.